you know, was one of the people who pushed to get the Tulip Festival going. And that was one of the big things that he photographed, of course, was tulips. And I got the bug from Malak Karsh to photograph tulips. For one reason or another, about 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I got into this thing. This one I love. This is a classic old image, probably, I don't know, 1940, late 40s, maybe 50s, I don't even know. The dates are all mixed up in my head, but I love this one, just ancient. This one was pretty cool. I had to take this one and turn it, I had to turn this from the public archives file, which was a PNG of 22K, into something readable here. Sorry it's not perfect, but it's as good as I could get with 10 minutes of fooling around. But yeah, these are people obviously planting tulips. When Malak passed away, it was a very strange thing because he was on the Hill a week or two before he passed away, and the day he was on the Hill, the exact day, I was across at the Museum of Civilization photographing the Hill. So I went, whoa, there's some strange serendipity there. And this is basically the whole article about his passing, etc., etc. I want to show you a few of the Malak shots that most people haven't seen. Malak had a broad range of talents, like Yousuf. Yousuf shot a lot of industrial stuff most people don't realize. But Malak shot a lot of things for the federal government, I guess, of industry. And so this is, I guess, on the Ottawa River I'm taking it. But I liked his composition in this, like the little guy right in front, really classic composition. I like this one too, probably on the Gatineau River somewhere in the logging days of Ottawa. Now a lot of people will look at this and go, oh, well that's a Karsh print. It's actually a Malak Karsh print, so it is a Karsh print. But Malak shot a lot of portraits with quite a lot of style, and most people do not realize that. There are hundreds of them. Going back to the lumber one, I always loved the dynamism of this shot. And again, don't forget, those were the days when you went out and shot with 1 or 2 frames on a scene like that. Not like today where you shoot 50 frames and pick the best one. You would do the timing exactly for that shot. And if you were out in the field with a view camera or even a roll camera with 12 shots, you were very careful about shots. You had to really nail it. Also a shot that looks akin to something Karsh might have done, Yousuf, but it's a Malak shot. Another Malak shot, basically industrial plant somewhere. But here's Yousuf. Again, he shot a lot of stuff that people don't realize, particularly before the whole Churchill thing. The Churchill thing is obviously what got him pushed forward dramatically. But he shot a lot of things. And even during the time post the Churchill thing, he shot a broad range of other commercial photographs. Getting back to the tulip thing, I did eventually, you know, win awards for tulip pictures, blah, 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 and sold them to Corel, and they went on to CD-ROMs, which were sold around the world, and blah, blah, blah. So it just keeps going. But now what's kind of fun is I've taken some of my old tulip pictures, put them into AI and Photoshop, and played around with them in the last couple of years, and I actually plan to sell those at some point in the near future when I get a minute from other craziness. Malak and I, when I presented him this, I had less gray. So, who can tell me what this is?
It's the back picture of the $1.
Exactly, exactly. This is the shot that was turned into...
I just want to give the credit to the lady here, so she told me that.
Good man, always give credit to the lady. Yeah, it's very interesting. Now, I ended up getting referrals from both Malak Karsh and Yousuf. I'll cover that in a bit later on. But what is most interesting is if you can nail that shot, nail this one. Pardon?
Cyprus peacekeeping?
No, sorry.
Peacekeeping in Cyprus?
Yes! Yes! Now where'd you see that before?
I'm going to say Life magazine, like from 1,000,000 years ago?
The statue by the
Close.
The peacekeeping center.
Close. Close. Now, this this is a half-hour talk. But you look up the controversy about the $10 bill and have fun. Because that's a doozy. But that was a referral from Malak. Basically, I kept running into Yousuf Karsh at the Shadow. I was shooting this series of fashion shots, and I, again, turned around and looked, and there was Yousuf Karsh standing in the doorway. I'm like, oh God, here he is again. I'm shooting it on another floor, and Yousuf is again, and I'm shooting it on the top of the roof or something, and I see Yousuf peeking around the corner. I said, Mr. Karsh, are you following me? And he said, I'm bored. Oh, great. But yeah, I mean, he lived there, and when things were going on, he liked to go out, and see what was happening, particularly photographers. Yousuf had a great love of other photographers, by the way. It wasn't a competitive environment like today. Basically, it was a case where there was a lot of work for everybody. And among his greatest photographs are portraits of other photographers. Speaking of that, I had to do my own portrait. I couldn't afford them. This is in my studio on Gladstone a number of years ago. I had a very large studio, 5,000 square feet, and allowed me to do things like this. And I shot cars and whatnot, the whole shebang. Anyway, getting back to this. This is a funny shot, and the story goes that this is, of course, Ansel Adams. That's Ansel Adams, I think. Yes, Ansel Adams. They were out in Carmel, and of course, Yousuf is posing like a stoic, classic artist pose. And somebody said, well, guess what? It's too bright, and apparently Ansel said, the clouds always listen to me. And at that very moment, a cloud cover came over to make the exposure very less contrasty. I've heard that story from 2 or 3 photographers on, oh my God. What did I pick up from Yousuf Karsh? Well, Karsh basically did stuff with contrast. He put a lot more contrast in because, of course, he had learned a lot of his craft from being a theater photographer. You probably know this, Ottawa theater. So every now and then I'll do things and go, oh boy, I got that from Karsh. But then every now and then I'll look at a picture 3 or 4 years later and I go, oh, nuts, I stole that from Karsh. I forget, it's not a copy. Sometimes it is, but in a lot of cases it just isn't. His way of lighting is intrinsic to a lot of people. He started the process way before most people, certainly in Canada, did. And so, again, someone you probably will recognize, who I shot for Time Magazine. I spent about 12 years as Time Magazine's main photographer in Canada. And this is a fascinating photo shoot. I could tell you an hour's worth on just this alone. This is General Dallaire, in case anyone doesn't know who that is. And again, pardon? I can't hear. Oh yes, Julie, right, correct. Good thing I didn't forget her name and I have you here. Again, a friend of mine, an entertainer, I used to use a lot of theater kind of lighting, basically. I still do. I light basically based on a dozen photographers. I don't pick one. Some of it's Malak, some of it's Yousuf, some of it's everybody else. Anyway, so this is a main light, almost like a Hollywood 1940s looking light. And again, a lot of top lighting. When I had my large studio, that's a whole long story, I used to do a lot of top lighting because we had 22-foot ceilings, and so I could bring booms in. It was great. Just super. Again, a lot of side lighting. This is basically a famous Canadian author, Gimme. Yeah, okay. So basically the Governor General's consort. He was the Governor General's consort. I always had to refer to him as that. We joked about it, but that's another story. But yeah, John Ralston Saul. I actually, when I met him, one of the things that I got some funny pictures with him because I said, by the way, I have to tell you that I read your book. And he's like, cover to cover? I said, yes. He said, that alone deserves the Order of Canada. I did a lot of portraits of judges. Karsh did a couple of them early on, but basically, eventually, what can I say? They ended up not having the budget for it. So they hired me, and I still remember John Sapinka when I did his portrait. Wonderful man, John Sapinka, Justice Sapinka, said, "Oh, well, you know, my last portrait was by Karsh, but I guess I'll call you from now on the poor man's Karsh." Sweet mother of God. Kicker lights. I used to use a lot of it in the studio whenever I could. And again, a lot of contrasty lighting, etc., etc., etc. Again, a lot of it's stolen from Karsh, sort of, kinda, but basically it's a case where shaping of faces is what, dramatic shaping of faces is what he learned in the theater, by the way. And by the way, that's a real head bonnet, not a fake. And you probably know that's Phil Fontaine, if any of you don't know that. Again, this is a business of depth of field and location. Karsh did things with research. He would research the hell out of anything and anybody so he could have a conversation with them. And that is one thing I did learn from Karsh. I eventually actually did Barbara McLaughlin's wedding, but that's another story. Wonderful fellow, again. I've got a million of these. This is sort of interesting one. Jody Middick is a Canadian sniper team leader, and really interesting. I got the little kicker lights out of, in black and white it looks pretty cool too, but that was an interesting shoot indeed. I do a lot of work with the military. My dad was one of the first people off the landing craft on D-Day, so I do a ton of work for them, and particularly for the Camerons. This is, again, a shot with a lot of contrast, and I started getting into a lot of punchy colors, in part because of, I don't know what, there was an era, and in part because I also was at the same time photographing tulips for about 2 years intently, so I started using color a lot. A noted Canadian singer, jazz singer. I didn't take this, Karsh did, but it's funny because he also worked for the Papal Nuncio, and as he was retiring, well, guess who they called? Me. And so that was a fascinating thing. Most people don't realize, I bet you nobody who lives in Rockcliffe realizes how Rockcliffe got its name. But if you go to the Papal Nuncio, there's a stone thing at the top of the building built in about 1860 maybe, 1870, and the building is called Rockcliffe. Coincidence? I don't know, but interesting. So I've shot in that building many times. Fascinating building, completely fascinating, and I've shot all the Papal Nuncios and on and on and on. This is a funny story. This is the Simon Reisman, who basically was brought free trade to Canada, all sorts of other things I suspect. I can't remember now. But at some point, I get, in my schedule, some years ago, 1998, 1999, Simon Reisman. I'm like, that name looks familiar, I said to myself, Simon Reisman. So he comes in, and I'm there focusing, and I'm like, okay, what sort of style of picture do you want? Well, I want it to be black and white and all this other stuff, blah, blah, blah. And as I'm shooting, I said, so how did you get my name? And he said, well, Yousuf Karsh recommended you. I'm like, oh, man. I said, could you have waited till I was finished, You just freaked me out, right? Because it's a very strange thing to try to come up with a shot of somebody is that good and that famous shot 10 years ago. It was just weird to me. I got it, but I was like, whatever. Parliament buildings, Malak shot the heck out of them, as have I. My great-grandfather not only built the Parliament buildings, but when they burnt down, he rebuilt them. That's a whole story on its own. In 1919, he was 78 years old. I shot Parliament many, many, many times for everything from PR, like Malak did, to, this was for Time magazine. This was on the cover of Time at the turn of the century of 2000, basically. And I engineered this entire picture. That's a story on its own. Malak did Christmas cards for MPs, and eventually that got passed down to me. And if you get a Christmas card from a Canadian MP in the last 15, 20 years, is probably one of my shots. A lot of them are actually credited, which I thought was kind of nice. There's the NDP. Trudeau's. I spent lots of time with Trudeau, traveling, doing various things. I always loved this shot of Trudeau by Karsh. I thought it was great. Got to photograph him myself on a number of occasions. And this was probably a Canada Day in 1977 or so. The little brat on the right with the funny hat, you probably recognize that guy. Do not get me started on that. Not that I'm anti-Trudeau, but it's a long story, but basically, this little guy almost got me shot by security that day. True story, that's another story. Okay, astronauts. I always envied the fact that Karsh photographed, Yousuf Karsh photographed the first astronauts. And by the time I got into photographing astronauts, Karsh was his career was starting to slow down. But I did manage to photograph all of our Canadian astronauts way before they actually got up in space, which was a lot of fun. You probably recognize the lady in the middle. That's another story. 24 Sussex Drive, you probably haven't seen it look this way, but this is a Malak shot of 24 Sussex Drive. Back when it's hard to believe, back when there was no security, no fences, no nothing. I'm getting sentimental now. And this is my shot. I got to do this because I knew all the prime ministers, and it's a whole long story, but when I put this on my webpage, at least 10 people stole it. Don't get me started on that topic, but I sued them all, and I made the front cover of most papers in Canada and the US over this lawsuit. That's another story. But basically, I have one of the few shots of 24 Sussex, both the exterior and interior, close-up shots that exist. So I do sell those in a stock library, basically. It's interesting photographing people that one of the Karshes, or photographing things that one of the Karshes has photographed before. Because I study their pictures. If somebody calls me to get a photograph done, I go, okay, well, let me see who that is. Okay, yeah, that's somebody, okay. Who photographed him before? Okay. And this is, of course, Douglas Cardinal, in case anybody doesn't know. Douglas Cardinal is a noted Canadian First Nations architect who did the Museum of Civilization, Now History, or is it the other way around? It was Civilization, Now It's History. Is it? Yeah, anyway, it's Now It's History. So that was interesting, getting the call to do his portrait, and so I did this. Again, I didn't copy anything, I always loved that ceiling, what can I say? But yeah, interesting guy, fascinating fellow, and talented as hell. This you can probably barely see, but this is the Arctic, and I had many conversations with Malak about the Arctic, and at some point I was offered a couple of assignments by Time, which I couldn't turn down, one including going across the Arctic and photographing the top 10 artists of the North. And so I did call him about that, and he told me various little highlights of things that he had done and whatnot, and quite a fascinating thing. He shot a ton of stuff up there. He loved the Arctic. Lessons learned. Basically, I did, in fact, have a couple of conversations with both Yousuf and Malak about how their success had happened. And both of them mentioned the women in their lives. And I learned from that. I've had 3 office managers. I've fired about 25 photographers in my career, but I've never fired an office manager. The first one was with me for 16 years, the second one about 14 years, the third one the last 20 years. Always have a smart office manager. They will put you in control, because I'm not good at lots of things, and one of them is bookkeeping. I'm not even good at slideshows. The other thing I learned from the Karshes is control your images. I basically have sold this image many, many times, but I've also photographed Alex Trebek, and that was the most profitable image I ever shot, because when he passed, the Trebek estate said, basically, use Paul Couvrette's picture for everything. And this appeared on over 25 magazine covers, 6 book covers, and on and on and on. Control your rights. That is almost unheard of in today's world of photography, but the buck stops here, basically. I control my rights, as did, actually, Malak. Malak was afraid to go online. At some point, after he passed, I talked to his wife, and I said, you really should put these online, you should do this, you should do this. And she said, Malak always hated the idea of his pictures being on computers. I said, I don't blame him, it's horrible. But he never did much. He's got a few online right now, but it's really quite funny. Looking for his shots was not easy. I used, I sold this as well a zillion times. It happens to be my dad. I got that from a Malak shot that he had done of Hands and Poppies. I stole it pretty well. This is a fun one. This is Brian Mulroney, which was a car shot. And again, I looked at this before photographing Brian, and I thought, you know, I don't know. It just wasn't something that got me in the shot, but I'm sure people liked it. Let me do something else. About, I don't know, 10 years later. And sure enough, I did. And if you saw the Mulroney funeral, this shot was all across North America, every embassy, giant, et cetera, et cetera. And it was chosen by the family, and on and on and on. Not to say it's a better shot, but there was something about it that they liked. And it was just interesting to photograph the same person. Really interesting. You never know how a person's going to take a picture that you did of them, just like the Churchill story, how they're going to receive it. This I shot at the Shadow, and again, one of the Karsh was wandering by. I shot a lot of magazine stuff. Oh, I threw these in because of the theater lighting. I thought that this really deserved theater lighting. You probably, this is Amanda Forsyth, and you probably know who this lady is on the right. Basically, a lot of groups that again would have been things that either Malak or Yousuf would have shot, got passed down to me. They were big-time commercial photographers. They shot a lot of things that you don't know about, but they shot them and they never had their name on them because they basically didn't really care that much. My name wasn't on this either. Oh, this is kind of a fun thing. I was looking up stuff recently, and I went, okay, let me see what the City of Ottawa Archives has. And I saw this fun picture of Yousuf done, I don't know what, 1940s or whatever the heck. 1946, there we go. And what got me was the caption on the picture of the Ottawa City Archives, 1946 photographer unknown. I went, sweet Jesus, are you kidding me? Don't get me started. Don't get me started. But yeah, a lot of people get forgotten. But not Yousuf. This is my friend Corey Avedisian, who was involved with the Armenian community. And if you look at Outside the Shadow, the Armenian community themselves pushed to have, I think they even funded it, I can't remember. But it's Outside the Shadow, and it's a great memorial to the fact that Yousuf Karsh lived there. And here's the end of that ceremony, basically, which I attended, the opening. And this is my favorite Karsh portrait. And it's kind of funny because 2 or 3 stories around this, I remember being at an event and chatting with Yousuf Karsh about this. And basically, we chatted about how he was inspired to do this. And I said, but Mr. Karsh, I said, you've got to realize, of course, that hardly anybody notices the other subject. And he looked at me and said, oh, you're very good. I said, yes, on the back of the chair, there's a fly. And Karsh, without hesitation, said, you know, the tricky part was getting the fly to stay there and pose with his back to the camera. I'm like, he was just, again, you couldn't get one past him. You just couldn't. You just couldn't. And that, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, is my presentation.